Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon as we get ready for a little Georgia-Florida football on Saturday afternoon. Bulldogs getting ready for that annual trip down to Jacksonville to take on the Gators, and a lot to get into about this game, about the lead up to it, and I'm getting a good feel for how this game is going to play out down in Jacksonville. But first, guys, let's get back to some news that happened over the weekend. It was a bye weekend for Georgia, but still plenty going on that front. And the Bulldogs get a big flip. Three-star linebacker Anthony Kruah flips from North Carolina to Georgia. Marietta standout, 6'2", 210, another big addition to the 2025 class for the Bulldogs. So, Ben, tell us what stands out to you about Anthony Kruah and how the Bulldogs wound up getting this big addition.
Well, ever since Zayden Walker, the five-star linebacker from South Georgia, committed over the summer, I think the big question has just been who else is Georgia going to add at linebacker and how many is Georgia going to add at linebacker? And we hadn't had a single answer to that question really since the beginning of June when Zayden made his decision. But I think that it had been trending for several months now that there was a core group of 3 or 4 linebackers, and I'll get into all of them here in a second. But Anthony Kruah was absolutely part of that group. He was committed to North Carolina since April. It doesn't take, a lot of deep dive to realize North Carolina hasn't had the best season, that if you're looking at who can you flip of the linebackers that Georgia was trying to flip, it's probably going to be an easier task for someone that's committed to North Carolina than somebody that's committed to, say, Tennessee, which is something that they're also still trying to do. And so if you've been subscribed to Dogs 24/7, you know that Anthony Kruah has been in the last 2 mock classes that I've put out. There was sound reasoning for that. Glenn Schumann and Anthony Kruah have developed a really strong relationship with one another. What's funny about this is I think that Glenn Schumann probably won over Kruah's parents before he won over Anthony. I mean, I think that this was a case where Anthony Kruah's parents were very bought in on Georgia from an early stage when he took that official visit in June. I think that they were probably sold on this, and that Anthony probably just needed a little bit more time to be able to see everything play out. He obviously had really strong relationships at North Carolina that kept him committed there a little longer than you might have even expected given some of their struggles. And so huge pickup for Georgia. I know that the casual fan will look at it and say, this is a 3-star linebacker. He's the number 37 linebacker in the country. He's not even ranked in the top 50 players in Georgia on the 24/7 sports player rankings right now. I get all of that. As someone who has seen him in person, I even sent this out. I tweeted this out immediately after he committed. When you do this job, you get around to high school football practices and you see guys and you say, that's a Georgia guy. Like, there is a clear physical difference between someone that is a Georgia guy, so to speak, and someone that is going, G5 or even fringe Power 4, or even in some cases, some of Georgia's rivals, where you look and say, this guy looks different, he plays different, feels different than other guys. And that's when you say, all right, this guy sort of has elevated himself to being in that elite Georgia tier of guy. The first time I ever saw Anthony Kruah at a football practice, it was a padded camp situation that they were doing with a bunch of other teams. You saw him immediately and said, that guy looks different than everybody else. I mean, he's built in a weight room. He looks like a Georgia linebacker. When you set some of these kind of, chiseled Georgia linebackers next to each other, like CJ Allen, some of these other guys that they have in that's what Anthony Kruah looks like. I mean, he is a very talented looking football player. I think what's most interesting to me about Kruah at this point is how exactly Georgia is planning to use him. When I've talked with Kruah in the past, he says that when he goes and watches Georgia, or he's at practice or whatever that may be, they tell him to look at 11. They say Jalen Walker is someone that you have a lot of pass rush skill set. We've even had it, people on at Dogs 24/7 with a keen eye for film have commented on some of our posts about him saying, man, his edge film looks really, really good. And I think that some schools were even looking at him more in that edge lens, someone that you put on the outside, get after the passer. But I think Georgia, as they've seen with Jalen Walker, as they really see with Zayden Walker in this recruiting cycle, I haven't even talked yet about Christian Gass or Tavion Wallace, a couple of the other linebackers that I think they're still going to try and flip. But all of those guys have an edge pass rushing skill set that Georgia views as someone that can play in one of those inside backer spots. And so I think that Kruah fits that bill of what they're looking for. I think that relationships ran really deep with Glenn Schumann. I think whenever you win over the parents, it's really hard in the Georgia world once you've won over the parents for a guy not to end up at Georgia, because once your parents are bought into Georgia, it's not hard for you to look around and say, man, these are all the best football players in the country. And man, this is one of the best programs in the country. And man, I want to go play in the NFL one day. And nobody does that better than Georgia and Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann do at this position. And so I think it became a pretty easy decision for him. I'll admit it, I've been expecting this to happen for a while. I've been waiting for all right, when is this actually going to happen? I found out 20 minutes before he was announcing it at 11 o'clock on Saturday that he was going to be flipping. So it's one of those things, if you've been reading our stuff, you kind of knew that it was coming, but sometimes these things, when they actually happen, they happen on a dime, and that's how it happened on Saturday.
Georgia now up to 24 commits in the 2025 class, sitting third in the nation, according to 24/7 Sports. And Brodo Baggins on YouTube says by the time Kirby's done with them 5-star. And my thought on that, too, is, they know what they're looking for in linebackers. So if you're a Georgia fan worried about, oh, he's just a 3-star, I would give Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart the benefit of the doubt there, because they know what they're looking for. Kipp, what do you think of this latest addition at linebacker, and the fact that Georgia's got another really interesting linebacker joining the class?
Yeah, they're looking for guys that can do a little bit of everything. And I don't know what's not to like about someone who's 6'2", over 200 pounds, and playing both ways. That's just kind of something, that's one of those boxes that you check for athleticism. And I mean, right after the guy commits, he goes out and just, balls out on Friday and scores every touchdown for Marietta. And I think when you have a linebacker who can run a kickoff back for a touchdown, that just, that says a lot to me about, what he can bring to the table as someone who could play all 3 downs. I think he's a guy that's probably, down the road, if he gets to compete in the, participate in the combine, he's probably going to be a, low to mid 4.5 guy. And if you have a guy that ends up being 6'2", probably in the 220s, 230 after, playing time at Georgia, and runs in the 4.5s, and I think you'll be looking back and going, yeah, I mean, obviously this is why Glenn Schumann went and saw him during Georgia's first bye week. And if we're going to go into that follow the visits thing, I mean, that's just one of those clear indicators. This guy is really important to Georgia. I mean, that's a serious, commitment for your linebacker coach to go see him. And so I just think that, Georgia's getting several guys in this class at the linebacker position that bring multifaceted tools to the table. I know, like we just brought up with Zayden Walker, and now seeing how Georgia has unlocked, Jalen Walker's skill set. I mean, they know the blueprint now for that type of player. So why not go and get more guys that kind of fit that same role and get as many Jalen Walker type players as you can get? I think that's where Georgia's at in Anthony Kruah. And I think now, if we're looking towards this potential to have over 85 players, load up on guys like that. And that's why I think Georgia's still looking at, at other guys like Christian Gass, Tennessee commitment. I think Georgia just went out and saw him this past week as well. So I just think Georgia's going to try to load up on these guys that can play inside linebacker, but can also help you at the edge position, as well as you just try to look for different ways to affect the quarterback.
I did want to add there as well. I find it interesting on a couple levels taking Anthony Kruah as well, because, on Friday, Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann were out at Grayson High School. They're looking at, an LSU linebacker commit, Jaden Breaker. I've already mentioned a Tennessee linebacker commit, Christian Gass, is someone that they're still trying to flip. Arkansas linebacker commit Tavion Wallace is someone that they're still trying to flip. I've gotten a lot of questions. Will Georgia add another linebacker now that they've taken Kruah? I think that Georgia would gladly, especially with Tavion Wallace, especially with Christian Gass, if either one of them said that they wanted to flip ahead of signing day in December, I think that absolutely either of them would still be takes for Georgia, and they're still going to continue to push for them. But I'll also note that when they were out there at Grayson and they were planning to get to Gainesville, and I don't know whether or not they got to Gainesville or not, but they also went to go see in those games the number 1 linebacker in the 2026 class, Tyler Atkinson, and then also the number 2 linebacker in the 2026 class, Xavier Griffin, are both in state. They're both getting recruited heavily by Georgia. I think that part of it is you look at those 2 guys and you say, you know, one of them's committed to USC right now. One of them's flirting very heavily with Ohio State. Georgia wants to make sure that they get at least one, if not both of those guys. And so I think that you have to get strategic with, you know, I don't have a good phrase for this, but the star-studdedness of who it is you're taking at linebacker. I think you sort of have to play that game sometimes. And I think that Kruah is a very savvy take for Georgia because of his ability, but also you're not really going to be scaring a lot of folks off in this class or the next one by taking a guy like that. And I think that that probably does come into mind when you're deciding who makes the most sense for Georgia as a program and as a culture and what it would mean for the future as well.
As always, stay glued to Dogs 24/7. A lot of good stuff from Ben on Anthony Kruah, and keep an eye out for whatever happens next because we know the Bulldogs are not done. Well, fellas, let's turn our attention to Saturday and another edition of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, Georgia and Florida down in Jacksonville. Both teams coming off a bye week, Georgia having beaten Texas the week before, and Florida with a really impressive win over a struggling Kentucky team. But 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff on Saturday, ABC, another chance to watch the Gators and the Bulldogs tangle. Wanted to play some clips of Kirby Smart talking about this Florida team. As you can imagine, a lot of praise for Billy Napier for this Florida team. A Florida team that, as Kirby points out in this clip, is probably playing its best football, has won 3 of its last 4 games, and the only loss was an overtime loss to Tennessee. But here's Kirby talking a little bit about Florida, about Billy Napier, and the issues, the problems they pose on Saturday.
I think they have a really, really good roster. A lot of players we've recruited and recruited against them, but they're playing their best football, and obviously a talented group. Really, a lot of great size across the front on the offensive and defensive lines. I think Billy knows that's where the key is in the SEC in terms of length and size. They play a lot of players on defense. They've had a lot of guys play up front. But, you know, their 3 losses have come to 3 teams that are ranked in the top 10. At least I think they are. I don't even know. But they're really good teams, and they played those teams well.
I want to get y'all's thoughts on where this Florida team is coming into this game because I'll be honest. I mean, I know that you always have to kind of take what Kirby says about an opponent, you know, with a grain of salt. He's not going to talk down to a team, but you know, I do think there's a lot of truth in what Kirby's saying. I mean, Florida is 4-3. I think the way they started this year, we thought, oh man, you know, it's just a matter of time before Billy Napier gets fired. Playing a lot better, having a little bit of momentum with that Kentucky game. Ben, what do you think about the state of this Florida team that Georgia's going to see on Saturday? A 4-3 team. They do have a really tough end and you know, a tough final stretch of this regular season. But bowl eligibility is definitely still on the table for this Gators team.
Well, I think you're right. I think that you have to take Kirby Smart with a little bit of a grain of salt when he's talking about an opponent. I also don't think he ever tells any lies whenever he's explaining what makes the opponent capable and strong. Like, he has different reasonings every week when he's playing a new team for why that team is a threat. And so I think that the validity behind what his reasons are for why you should take Florida seriously are totally accurate. I mean, it's a great roster. There's not many teams that Georgia is going to be playing this year where they have a couple of guys on their roster where they won recruiting battles directly against Georgia. Like, there's only so many teams in the country that can say that. Now, Florida, I'm not saying they have it up and down the roster, but there are some instances where it's like you can look and say, all right, they won that heads up against Georgia. And so there are going to be players that Georgia really liked and likes that are going to be suiting up for Florida on Saturday. And so I think anytime that's the case, you got to take it seriously. I think that this year, Florida has been a team that loses to the teams that it should lose to and beats the teams that it should beat. And so I think that this is a game that Florida should lose. So Georgia should handle business, but it's not going to be an easy one. I mean, I think that you saw a Tennessee team that was probably overlooking Florida a little bit, and it almost got them. And Tennessee was lucky to get out of that one alive. And how differently would we be talking about this game specifically had Billy Napier just gone for 2 at the end of regulation and they got it and they win and that game against Tennessee, because then you're looking at a Florida team that has 2 losses against A&M and Miami that are looking like 2 of the best teams in the country right now with the way that they're playing. And a win against Georgia would go so far for Florida's playoff hopes. That obviously didn't happen, but it's just that margin of this being a 2-loss Florida team that I think everyone is taking really, really seriously, to now it being a 3-loss team that I think everyone is just overlooking, even though, I mean, we talked about it before we came on. I don't know how great of a blueprint it necessarily is for beating Georgia, but this is a team that threw for 260 yards, only completing 7 passes last week or in their last game. This is a team that rushed for 5 touchdowns, despite the fact their number 1 running back was out last week and their other best running back transferred to Georgia. So it's like you're looking at a team that's finding ways to be productive. I mean, they handled Kentucky a heck of a lot better than Georgia did. And so I think that you don't look at that transitive property and say, oh, I think Florida's going to give Georgia a good game because of that. But I think that you have to look at this Florida team and say, they've got some talent on defense. They're going to be able to make some stops here and there. They've got enough playmaking ability on the offensive side of the ball that, like, if you don't play a good football game, it's going to get real dicey real quick in Jacksonville. And I think that Kirby's sending that message pretty early. And from what I can tell, and Kipp, you would be able to say it better than I. Jordan, you'd be able to say it better than I. But I feel like this is a game that Georgia just never overlooks in the Kirby Smart era. Like, I feel like no matter what level Florida is at or how well Georgia's playing, that there is enough rivalry to this rivalry that Georgia always comes ready to play in Jacksonville.
What do you think of that, Kipp?
I don't think you're ever going to find a bloodier Tuesday than the Tuesday coming off the bye week, getting ready for Florida under Kirby Smart. He might not coach 20 years because of this rivalry, because he's going to put so much into this game every single year to make sure that fan base and that team never feels like they can just walk into Jacksonville, Tampa, Atlanta, wherever these teams play down the road and be able to, to catch Georgia off guard. There will never be a motivational issue in this game under a Kirby Smart coach team. I don't think he even will need to have any, locker room speeches leaked either. I just think this team, this roster is going to know this game's really important to their head coach, and it should be important to them. I agree with what Ben's saying, and this is just a really interesting Florida team. You got DJ Lagway, I think reps every, the more experience he gets, he'll become a bigger X factor. They're a very explosive potential offense. I don't think it's a highly efficient offense. I just think it's one of those where, they're going to try to hit on big plays. And there's a lot of intriguing storylines here, especially when you have, co-defensive coordinators who were, I think they were at Auburn last year. So they have some experience versus Georgia. They're going to probably try to attack Georgia in a different way. And then looking at Florida's offense, it's kind of, Georgia doesn't have a lot of experience against these players. Like I said, DJ Lagway gaining more experience, but then Florida's top 2 wide receivers are guys that they got out of the transfer portal, Elijah Badger and Chimere Dike. Like, those are guys that were not at Florida before. But they're both averaging over 20 yards a catch. It's just this high impact downfield explosive passing attack that I think it's going to be interesting to see how Georgia attacks this game on both ends. I am interested to see if they're just counting the box, if Bobo's counting the box every play and trying to attack them with screens or handoffs, because I just think that that's going to be Florida's main priority, is not getting beat over the middle of the field. So it's a lot of intriguing matchups in this game, and I think it makes for a more interesting game because, like you guys said, before the season, we were just talking about who will be the interim coach for Florida in this game. We were just talking about, will Jaden Rashada even get to see Billy Napier? And now they've got some momentum. They've got a reason to play. And so for Georgia, it becomes, okay, well, now you got to go in there against a motivated team and just destroy their willpower. And they have exactly the head coach that will always be motivated to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned Ron Roberts is the guy that came over from Auburn. I know that he's got a good reputation as far as disguising blitzes, catching offenses off guard, I should say. And the thing that's interesting to me too, looking at this matchup, Kip, I think you did a good job outlining that this offense hasn't been very efficient, and what they've sort of survived on is explosives. To me, guys, that sounds like the Auburn team that Georgia faced earlier this year. And for the most part, Georgia did a very good job of keeping them in line. Cam Coleman, I don't think had any catches in that game. There were big expectations for him in that one. So obviously, Georgia's got to bring its A game, and we've seen weird things happen in Jacksonville. But to have such an inefficient offense. I mean, Ben, you said the numbers with the passing. It almost feels like that those numbers wouldn't work out mathematically. I mean, they're just living on big plays. Uh, that's not a recipe, I think, to beat a Georgia team. You got to be more efficient. You got to kind of trade body blows with them. You're not going to be able to hit big plays. It's going to be very difficult to do. Kirby also talked about DJ Lagway, who's obviously going to be a big focus going into this game. DJ taking over for the injured Graham Mertz, a freshman with a lot of potential and who has flashed it. Kirby was asked if he felt like the offense has evolved much with DJ now in for Graham Mertz. This is what Kirby had to say about DJ Lagway and how this Gators offense is running now with a true freshman running the show.
His arm talent and arm strength itself is elite. He has great size. He can make all the throws. He's got a couple, really wow throws. I think for his age and experience, he's ahead of his time in terms of his pocket movement management. A lot of freshmen abort the pocket and run out of it. He does a good job stepping up through it, and he's made several plays where he trusted the pocket and steps up and makes really good throws. Threw the deep ball really well. Obviously, last game against Kentucky, it's not so much the change. Obviously, he has a running ability, but Graham is a good athlete too. So it's not a huge change between the two in terms of what they ask him to do. I think he's capable of making explosives, and they got the extra element in the quarterback run when they need it. They don't do it a ton, but when they need it, he can do it, and he's large. I mean, he's big. He's hard to tackle.
Yeah, you think about the size he brings to the position. It's not going to be easy to bring DJ Lagway down. Kip, what do you think about what Georgia is up against in terms of facing DJ Lagway? He's a guy that's still a young guy, but there have been moments where you've seen him flash the potential that he's got. That I think if you're a Florida fan looking big picture and looking at what DJ could be, that there is plenty of reason for excitement.
There is. I mean, he's coming off his first SEC start. So obviously, like I said, reps are going to really allow him to continue to grow. But I mean, he's going to be tested against Georgia's defense. I think there's still a growing process for him. And I think, you're going to learn a lot about where he is in this development against a defense like that. But he's going to try to push the ball down the field because, along with that size comes elite arm strength. He's got the ability to really put a lot of velocity on the football. And for Georgia, I mean, your Humphreys and Everett are going to be tested big time. Potentially in the first half, knowing that Georgia could be without a couple of safeties out there in the secondary, that's probably when they're going to try to attack as well. So I think it's this being his second SEC start. There's a lot of upside there, but there's going to be some growing pains as well. And Florida's going to have to, be okay with that, knowing that he's going to make some plays that probably have them, shaking their head. But it's an interesting aspect because you're talking about a fan base being excited about his future, but it also means you probably have to keep Billy Napier around because, you get rid of Billy Napier and your quarterback's probably going to hit the portal. And so, I do think that they're probably a package deal. Billy probably wants to keep it that way. But the guys I brought up earlier, those transfer wide receivers, they're going to play a huge role in this game because unlike Auburn and Cam Coleman, these guys are fifth-year players. They've played a lot of football, and so they're going to be guys that he leans on. hey, go make a play. I'm just going to throw it. These guys played for Arizona State and I believe Wisconsin. These aren't guys that, were stepping up in competition in a major way. They've played some big time teams for 4 years. So I just think that's kind of another aspect where you can't go a 1-to-1 Auburn, Florida, because I just think that when you have very experienced wideouts like that, they might be able to help you out in situations where maybe you put a ball where you shouldn't, or you don't read the route correctly. I think they're going to be able to make up for a couple of his mistakes. So Georgia's going to have to keep that in mind, that these are very experienced wide receivers that, like I said before, that Georgia's defense hasn't played against before.
Yeah, throw in Trey Wilson too, a guy that I thought was very impressive as a freshman last year, and still waiting to see on Montrell Johnson, the Florida running back. He missed the Kentucky game dealing with injury. Ben, what are your thoughts on DJ Lagway and what Georgia's up against?
He's an impressive football player. I mean, you can see why Florida fans are, feeling probably more optimistic right now than they have been for the last year and a half, and it's because I think they've got a quarterback that. I think that they liked what Graham Mertz had given them early this season. I just think that when you're Florida, where you're at right now, you are thinking future. Like, how does this get better long term? And I think that DJ Lagway is that type of guy. I think Kipp's exactly right. It probably is a package deal with Billy Napier, and that's probably exactly how Billy Napier wants to keep it, and why DJ Lagway looking good in this game probably is important for him, because if DJ Lagway has a dud of a game and Florida gets, their clock cleaned, there might be a lot of Florida people out there saying, who cares? DJ Lagway is not going to save the whole program, whereas if you keep it close or respectable, or DJ Lagway looks awesome and you lose close to Georgia, I think that there's going to be a lot of people saying, all right, this thing's moving in the right direction. The record this year is not going to look great, but it's going to, be one of the top 10 hardest schedules probably by the end of the year. I think that he is the hope that Florida has to lean on right now, because if they end up firing Billy Napier and DJ Lagway transfers, you're starting the whole thing over from scratch. And I'm not saying that can't work, or that whoever the new guy is can't come in and establish, the program that Florida's been looking for. But, I've been a defender of Billy Napier more than most, probably. I think that this Florida football program is, a better program than the way that people talk about it. And I do think that they have some gettable games here in their last 5 that everybody was acting at the beginning of the year like it was going to be the most unwinnable stretch in the history of football. And it's like, all right, well, now we're looking at Ole Miss doesn't look that great. LSU's probably when their quarterback's great, they're great. Florida State's one of the worst Power 4 football programs we've seen or teams that we've seen in a long, long time. And I don't think they're going to beat Georgia. I don't think they're going to beat Texas, but I think that both of those games are more winnable than anybody ever imagined that the games were going to be in Florida's world. So it's like, you're now looking at all 5 of their last 5 that were supposedly impossible for them to win. And now it's like, all right, they win 2 of them. Is Billy safe? If they win 3 of them, Billy's absolutely safe. But if they win 2 of them, I think that Billy might be safe. And I don't know how many people were talking about that as a realistic possibility a few weeks ago.
No, I'm totally with you. I think if he wins 2 of these, he's okay. And I think that, things are trending in the right direction, but they have to keep it that way going forward. Well, it's almost been 30 minutes, and we haven't said the name Trevor Etienne, which probably feels like a little bit of a misstep on my part. But obviously, he is a big part of the conversation. Former Florida running back getting ready to face his former team. I wrote about it back at SEC Media Days, talking to some of the Florida guys. Had nothing but positive things to say about Trevor Etienne. We haven't talked to Trevor this week. I doubt we will, at least before this game. Arian Smith talked a little bit about what he thought, this would be like for Trevor, and said that, that it probably feels personal, that you want to go out there and play well. And Arian said it's personal to him because he is from Florida. But he talked about that Trevor is grateful for what he's got at Georgia, that he said that he didn't have at Florida. And Arian didn't lay this out, but we know that Georgia's got more talent around Trevor Etienne than Trevor had while he was at Florida. Kirby was asked about the situation Trevor's in, because this isn't the first time a Georgia player is facing his former team. I know off the top of my head, Dominic Lovett did that when he was at Missouri. So what's sort of the mindset that Trevor needs to take going into this game? This is what Kirby had to say.
Yeah, focus on the task. It's not a chance. You don't want to get caught up in emotions and be emotional. I don't think that helps any. Dom's gone through it with Missouri a couple times, and different players. That's part of college football now. We've had kids go down there, so we don't get caught up in it much. I mean, at the end of the day, what's going to make you play well? It ain't worrying about that.
Totally get what Kirby's getting at there, that you can't get caught up in facing your former team. But Kipp, how much attention are you putting on Trevor Etienne going into this game, understanding that, I'm sure there is a little bit of something personal going against his former teammates?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of the things we talked about all offseason, but unfortunately for Georgia, they haven't been able to get the run game going. So getting Tate Ratledge back, we know he's doing everything he can to get back out there and at least be in the guard rotation will help. But I think, you get a lot of coach speak, obviously, from Kirby, but he's right. Georgia's already faced players. I mean, look at the Kentucky game where, you're facing Pop Johnson, you're facing Brock Vandegrift. We're talking about how Florida's kind of looked surprising, how some teams maybe, a lot of these games have been closer than we thought. I just think that's the SEC now with the transfer portal, is that every team's just they're not going to have depth, but I think they're just going to split starters and you're just going to have guys playing for other programs. And that's kind of the norm. So while it still kind of feels new, obviously a rivalry game, I know Trevor's going to be as motivated as he can be to go out there and show out against his former teammates. But again, you can't force it. And I think Kirby's probably trying to just say, more than anyone, he needs Trevor to maintain his composure, not try to force a big play and not protect the football and have a turnover or something like that. So I just think that having a big game might be something that he's thinking about. He might be the Wolverine line and bed meme of just him being in the end zone in Jacksonville. But he's got to focus on making sure he does what helps the team win. And that might not be a huge game. That might just be making sure that they can move the chains or making sure they're, staying ahead of the sticks in general. So I don't think it's a huge storyline. I just think it's one of those situations where you want to have a big game every week. You want to have a big game this week more than anything. But you can't let it become your mindset, or you can end up making mental mistakes and mental errors in the game that, like I said, with the transfer portal, it's how it's going to be. We've got parity now in the conference as much as we've had in the last decade. And I think overall, even though it's making Georgia not blow teams out like they have the last couple of years, I think overall for fans, it's good for football because there's a lot more interest in this game than we thought there would be.
For sure. And I think it's going to make for an interesting storyline in a game that always provides some interesting storylines. Ben, I'm going to kind of change the question to you. How much do you expect to see Trevor Etienne in this game? And I'll just speak on my thought. I don't know that they're going to ground and pound Florida because, as Kipp said, it seems like the running game this year has been hit and miss. But I expect to see a lot of throws out to the flats of Trevor Etienne. I think this offense is at its most effective when number one has the ball. So, Ben, how much do you expect to see Trevor Etienne with the ball in his hands and the way Georgia tries to use him against his former team?
Well, I will say I did talk to Trevor about this after the Texas game. So maybe I'll tease an article that I'll put up on the site at some point, just because he spoke a little bit about, and he's been trained by Kirby in his brief time being in Kirby's program. He's been trained very, very well. And so he didn't say anything earth shattering, or there was no bulletin board material or anything, but you could see him, light up and acknowledge the fact that he's got a lot of love for those guys in Florida, and that he's got friendships in Florida that are stronger than some of the friendships he has at Georgia, just because that's where he was for a longer period of his life. And so there's some good stuff there. And I think that this game matters to him. And I understand why Kirby Smart has to downplay it, and why caring about this game and wanting to beat your old friends and all these things, how none of that is going to make you good enough or better enough to beat Florida and Jacksonville. Like, you got to play better football and you got to do all the things that you normally do throughout the week. I get all of that. I do also think that there is a human element to all of this. And I think that Kirby Smart, as much as anyone, would love to get Trevor Etienne involved in a really big way, not just for Trevor Etienne's sake, not just as a, hey, let's, twist the knife in Florida's back because we went and got their star running back. Like, all those things would be nice little cherries on top. But I think that there is something to everyone in that room knows the situation with Trevor Etienne, right? Like, everybody knows how it would reflect upon him if he leaves Florida for Georgia and they lose in Jacksonville. And so I do think that there is an element of everybody's going to want to band it together to play better on behalf of Trevor. I also think that whether Kirby Smart or Mike Bobo, whoever ultimately admits to it or not, like, yeah, if they get into the red zone, I think they're going to call some plays or some things that they think are going to work for Trevor Etienne. Not that they wouldn't always do that, but I just think in a game like this, do you not want Trevor Etienne to get in the end zone? Do you not want to have that moment, whether it's that, being able to little brother your rival, whether that's sending a message to future transfer targets like, hey, come here and we're going to get you touchdowns in games that, you even against your old team where you maybe weren't getting as many touches as you would have liked. So again, I'm not sitting here saying Georgia's game planning for Trevor Etienne to be able to have the best game that he can possibly have. But I think that there are going to be situations in this game where they say, let's make this a Trevor Etienne situation because it's great for him. It's great for locker room morale. All the other guys are going to rally behind. Like, everybody on Georgia's offense is going to be so fired up if Trevor Etienne scores a touchdown in this game that it goes beyond just, oh, let's try and force the issue to get it for this guy. It's like, this will mean something to the entire room. And for an offense that's trying to find energy, that's trying to find chemistry, that's trying to just be a more consistent version of itself, like, what better from a morale standpoint thing to do than, I don't want to say force the issue, but I might recommend forcing the issue with Trevor Etienne at times in this one.
I think it's always a good idea to get the ball to Trevor Etienne, however you do it. Before we take a break, I do want to plug 12 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. I will have our preview podcast. We will go live with Swamp 24/7's Graham Hall, have a chance to learn more about this Florida team, see how the Gators are feeling and what they're saying in the lead up to this game. So again, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. Be sure to tune in for that. We're going to take a quick break, talk a little bit more about what was said among the players during Monday's interviews, and talk a little bit more about this matchup, and then talk a little bit about UJ Hoops. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about Carson Beck. He was a big part of the conversation on Monday, his recent struggles. I believe he had 3 interceptions in that win against Texas. Kirby Smart was asked about him if someone asked him what's wrong with Carson, what his response would be. And Kirby basically said that there wasn't anything wrong with Carson, that nobody's going to be perfect, and that, he was very happy with the leadership he's shown, the way he's run this offense. Arian Smith was also asked a similar question. Is there anything that he felt like Carson Beck needs to improve going forward? This is what Arian had to say.
You don't really need to do much better as like quarterback. He does all the things he needs to do as a quarterback for us, like checks or like make sure we're in the right run or right protection. I'm sure he's talking about things like he missed a throw, like, or we missed a catch or something like on offense, taking accountability because that's the person he is. So I'll probably say nothing. We just got to play better as an offense and be all 11 of us on the same page and for that play to work. So I would say that.
Guys, before we kind of get into this, I did want to read some of the statistics. Carson has had some issues away from Sanford Stadium this season in Georgia's games that have been either on the road or neutral sites, which goes back to that Clemson game, only completing 59.5% of his attempts, 1,052 yards, which isn't bad, 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. You look at the home games this year, 75.5% of his attempts have been completed, 941 yards, 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Now, I'll open this up and I'll kind of start this conversation on, should we be concerned about Carson Beck at this point? And my the way I look at it is this. I am going to be concerned if he comes out of this game and has similar struggles to what we saw at Alabama, to what we saw at Texas, because he's had a bye week. I do really think that a lot of the issues we've seen have been a product of Carson not being 100%. I mean, I can think of specific interceptions he threw at Texas and at Alabama that boiled down to he didn't get enough on the football. And I can't help but wonder, was that an injury thing or was that just a, a misguided throw, having a little too much faith in yourself? So to me, this is the game where I'm going to circle. And if he struggles, if he throws multiple interceptions, that's when alarm bells are going to go off for me. I'm not waving away some of the issues he's had and the mistakes he's made. He's thrown more interceptions than we expected him to throw after the way he played in 2023. But I want to see how he plays in this game. And if it feels like he's taken a step forward, if it feels like he did a better job placing the football, of not making mistakes, I'm going to feel better about Carson Beck and how he's been playing. I'll start with you, Kipp. Are you concerned right now with how Carson's playing? And what do you think about his situation going into this Florida game?
Well, it's half Carson. I'll say that yeah, there's some concern there because he's obviously not playing to the same standard he had last season, and we don't need to go down the who's in the NFL now that he was throwing to. I just think that you have to eliminate that now and say it's as much on him as it is on us pass catchers. I mean, what do they have, like 14 drops this season? So there's some concern about the pass catcher room as well. Those guys have to step up because that's affecting him mentally. I mean, you can't have it not. You see, you make a good read, you put good zip on the ball, you throw a catchable ball, and they don't get it. The fact that they're basically at where they were last season in drops already, that kind of raises a flag there. To your point, if Carson's not 100%, it's going to affect his ability to put zip on the ball. But that's on the coaching staff to know kind of where Carson is in practice, what he's able to do during the week, and game plan around that. Not put him in situations where he's having to make throws he can't. And so I think he had that bye week before the Alabama game, and still there were some issues there. So I do think that there's some reason for concern, but there's also still, again, upside. The potential for them to get better is still there. And like I mentioned earlier, when you have guys like Austin Armstrong and Ron Roberts, defensive coordinators that you've competed against before, then I think that also helps too. So I do think that Carson Beck has had some success against those guys. And so I think that on paper, it matches up well for him to be able to have a bounce back game. But in the end, you got to fix the drops in practice, and he needs to not turn the football over. It's as simple as that. And so I think that this is going to be kind of that measuring stick. If he comes out there, looks healthy, and is still making mental mistakes, or his receivers are not on the same page and costing him some big plays, then yeah, we're going to be looking at this team and having to kind of change the expectations for what this offense can do.
I think it's fair to point out that they had that bye week before Alabama, and obviously Carson struggled in that game. Wanted to read this just really quickly. Beck's numbers that are down from last season. Obviously, this is not the full season to this point, but his completion percentage is down. He's at 66% so far. Yards per attempt is down to 8.0. Quarterback rating is down. Yards per game is down. He's thrown 8 interceptions through 7 games after throwing just 6 in 14. So, Ben, what's your read on the Carson Beck situation? Are you worried at this point? What do you sort of take from the way he's played lately?
I mean, I'm not worried. I mean, I think Carson Beck, again, not to get too Kirby Smart cliche, but I do think he's a classic case of it's not never as good as it seems, never as bad as it seems. Like, I think some of the times in the past where we've looked at his gaudy completion percentage numbers and been like, man, he's really sharp and accurate and makes the right decisions. It's like sometimes that's been reflective of just, game planning and scheme and things like that, where he's got, taken some easy ones. I also will look at this year. I mean, he's had the 3 games, and I think it's really the 3 games that everyone looks at and is like, he did not play well from a turnover standpoint, are the Alabama game, the Texas game, and the Mississippi State game. He threw 41, 48, and 50 passes in each of those 3 games. Like, the reality is there's not many college quarterbacks that are going to throw the ball 41 times, 48 times, 50 times and not turn the ball over. There's not many professional quarterbacks that are going to be doing that 41, 48, and 58 times and not turning the ball over. Aside from that, his high passing attempts of the season was 33 against Clemson. So anytime that he throws for essentially 30 or less passes, he's not turning the ball over, probably because he's not feeling as pressed to be making the right throw because they're in situations where they're having to throw the ball more. The one outlier in that is probably the Mississippi State game, and I think that they just felt that there were some good opportunities in the downfield passing game in that specific matchup that resulted in them doing that. And again, he had one early that was maybe a little bit careless, but also unfortunate on the tip. And then he had one in the end zone where he felt like he was seeing something different than what Lawson Lucky was seeing and what the defender was doing. So I think that for me, I think you're right, Jordan. If he goes into Jacksonville and has 2 or 3 interceptions, then it's like, all right, is this just kind of who he is? I think that if they go into Jacksonville and they run the ball a little bit more than they have in the past and they throw the ball 30 times or so, and he probably doesn't turn the ball over, that we're going to be looking at it and just saying, you can't expect Carson Beck to do too much. And I think that at times is what's happened this year is they've put a lot on Carson Beck's shoulders and said, hey, we need you to be this guy and go do this. And just, giving him 30, 50 pass attempts in a game, you're going to throw some picks. It's just the way that's going to be. Anthony Edwards was just having, not to do a huge aside, but I saw Anthony Edwards was having a back and forth with New York Knicks fans yesterday. And they were like, come to New York. And he's like, no, I don't, I have one bad game and y'all are going to be booing me. He's like, we play 82 games. Not all of them are going to be perfect. Like, all these games are not going to be perfect. And if you ask Carson Beck to throw the ball 50 times, every single pass attempt, that is not going to be perfect.
Yeah, that almost sounds too like Jazz for the Yankees was upset at Yankees fans booing Juan Soto. He was like, "Yeah, that's going to be a great way to convince him to stay. Good idea." No, I mean, I think it's a relevant point. Well, as I mentioned, we will do the podcast with Graham on Thursday, really getting into this game. But I do want to give us a chance to talk about it from what we see. What do you guys want to see Georgia accomplish? What are you looking for Georgia to do in this game on Saturday? And Kipp, I'll start with you. Is there a specific area of this game that you're going to be really watching closely from the Georgia perspective? What you want to see them do against the Gators?
Not abandon the run game. As simple as that. I mean, you even look back at, the Texas game. They were having a lot of success, and then they didn't stick with it in the second half. It was just mind-boggling to me. I get it. If you think you're beat up on the offensive line, you don't want to ask them too much. That's kind of where the game plan is. But it still seems like overthinking it. Not to at least call Trevor's name a couple more times to see if you can give yourself more control of the football game and kind of in this thing before they get momentum. So I think in Jacksonville, sticking with it and, not going to so many empty back sets, with Trevor not even out there. I just didn't see a lot of success with that. I think they need to focus on utilizing the ground game as much as possible. And honestly, I think we may have talked about this during the first bye, but let's see Sakovi White. Let's see what he can do. Get some guys out there. You've asked a lot of Arian Smith. Dylan Bell's had some up and down games. But I think Sakovi White still, this situation where he's one of your better pure wide receivers that you have in that room, even though he's a freshman, haven't really seen him unleashed. So if he had a good week in practice, don't be afraid to get him out there and see if he can make some plays, because Carson Beck needs as many confidence builders as he can get. And I just think that Sakovi could be one of those guys that could make plays a number of ways.
This Florida game always seems to be the point in the year when you start seeing how much progress a true freshman has made. And it's just, you sort of watch the snap counts. And this is a good point to kind of pay attention to and say, okay, who's playing more? Who do they trust? We've seen the last few weeks, guys like Chris Cole, Justin Williams getting a little bit more involved. So Sakovi will be somebody to watch. Ben, what about you? What aspect of the game are you watching for from Georgia? What you want to see from the Bulldogs on Saturday?
I think I'm going to be watching how they defend DJ Lagway, and I understand that he is a freshman and he's inexperienced, but there's a lot of talent there that when you look at where has Georgia struggled historically, Kirby Smart defenses, it's been with those playmaking quarterbacks that can throw the ball down the field. So, I mean, I think, I was thinking about this when I was watching the A&M game and Marcel Reed comes in. It's like, everyone's always like, Georgia struggles with running quarterbacks. Like, Georgia doesn't struggle with just running quarterbacks. Georgia struggles with running quarterbacks that can also move the ball downfield with their arm. And I think that DJ Lagway, even though he's young, even though he's inexperienced, he can do a lot of those things with his arm down the field. And like Kirby Smart said, when things break down and he needs to do things with his legs, he does it really, really well with his legs. And so I think that this is going to be a good litmus test for Georgia because, I mean, you look at this year, didn't do great against Jalen Milroe. Michael Van Buren gave him some trouble at times during that game. This is another opportunity for Georgia to say, like, how does this defense stack up against a quarterback that can threaten you in that way? And I expect Georgia to do a pretty good job in this matchup. I think that DJ Lagway's inexperienced youth, hasn't seen a lot in SEC football, is going to catch up to him in a game like this. But I also think that he's going to do a thing, once or twice throughout the game that's going to make all of us be like, oh, like, is this something that's like a recipe against this Georgia defense that other teams are going to exploit later in the year? And so I think that's probably what I'll be watching the closest in this game. There's a lot that I think you can take away from this game. I think this is going to be a really good measuring stick game for Georgia across the board, really, in everything that they do. But in that area specifically is probably what I'll be watching.
Mine sort of goes hand in hand with yours, Ben, and it's specifically rushing DJ Lagway, how the pass rush shows up, not only because they had so much success against Texas, 7 sacks as part of a defense that had 10 tackles for loss and turned Texas over 4 times. But if you remember last year against Graham Mertz, Georgia did an outstanding job of getting after him. I remember Ty Ingram Dawkins probably had to that point the game of his career against Florida. I can't remember. It might have been Damon Wilson might have forced a fumble in that game. I remember that he and TID were big in getting after Graham Mertz. So that's what I want to see. Can they replicate that pass rush? Are they able to affect DJ Lagway? Because again, and this is part of the conversation after the Jaden Daniels Hail Mary. The best way to get quarterbacks off their game is to rush the passer, blitz and make them uncomfortable. I think if you let DJ Lagway sit back there, especially early in the game, the key for Georgia has to be to make him uncomfortable, make him press. You do that early, you get some stops or you get some turnovers, and you're putting a true freshman in a really tough situation. Georgia men's basketball minute. A lot going on with the Bulldogs with the season right around the corner. On Tuesday night, so if you're watching this live, it's later tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Georgia has an exhibition against UCF. Will be our first opportunity to watch them live. They played at Charlotte the day that we were in Austin, Texas for that game. So Georgia's wanting to make the most of this. This is a exhibition raising money for UGA Miracle. I would encourage folks that if you're around, go check this out. I think this will be a fun exhibition, good chance to watch a team with 9 new players. I'll have a story after the fact out of what stood out to me, understanding that we got less than a week to go before the start of the season. It'll be next Monday, November 4th, that Georgia hosts Tennessee Tech in the season opener, and a lot of intrigue about this team, about a team that I do think is fully capable of being back in the NCAA tournament, which I know Georgia fans are super excited about. I would also say this on the UGA Men's Basketball Minute. Pay attention on Friday. They have got a 4-star combo guard, Caden Mingo, in the 2025 class that's going to be announcing his commitment. He's got, I believe, 4 finalists. Georgia's one of them. We'll see what he decides, but I would say based on the intel I have, Georgia should feel pretty good. And not only about getting Caden Mingo, but he's got a brother that's very talented as well, I believe, in the 2026 class. So Mingo announcing, I believe, Friday morning. I'm expecting good news for Georgia on that front. Well, we will wrap up the episode right there. Actually, one more thing. I got to throw it to Kipp. Let's talk about the NFC South leading Atlanta Falcons.
Let's go, man. I mean, guys, I've never been more sad for Kirk Tober to end. I mean, the guy had 8 touchdowns in 2 games against the Bucs. It's the best month any quarterback for the Falcons has ever had against the Bucks, and it's one of the best months the Falcons quarterbacks ever had, period. So, it's sad to see us turn the page here, but yeah, this division is ours for the taking now. I think right now you have to start looking at what the Falcons are going to do to improve this roster and make a trade for a pass rusher at least. I think, look at what just now happened where somehow the rest of the NFL continues to let the Chiefs just load up throughout the season. I don't know why they continue to answer the phone and make that Chiefs roster better. But maybe, if Kurt Font, if you're getting a call from the Falcons, answer it because we're not going to use those picks anyway. Let's just go out there and get some players and load up this team because it finally looks like the Falcons are ready to get to the playoffs again. And I think, that tampering that we did this offseason looks to have been worth it because after the quarterback play Atlanta's had the last couple of seasons, it was, just so refreshing to actually see competent quarterback play, much less, maybe top 10, top 15, passing attack from us right now. So, hey, it's a good time for one of the Atlanta sports teams. You take those good months, good weeks when you can get them.
I want to pose too a question from the comments. Humongous on YouTube. You guys got any fun, good memories of this weekend from years past, whether covering or just attending? I'll throw it to you, Ben. You got anything you'd be willing to share on this podcast before we get out of here?
Willing to share. I will say this is the rivalry that got me into college football. I was my best man in my wedding is a Florida grad, big Florida fan, Florida season ticket holder, and so I grew up coming to this game, hanging out with his family in Jacksonville. I was with him actually in 2007 in the end zone when Georgia stormed the field. And I'll never forget him looking at me. And I didn't really have a dog in the fight at the time. I was kind of just down there enjoying college football games. I'll never forget, shout out Chris Stevens, best man at my wedding. I'll never forget him looking at me and saying, Mark Richt has no class, as he's rooting for a team that has Urban Meyer as its head coach, which we look back on as a funny moment. But I'll say that was probably the moment where if I were to, when I was like a kid, not really deciding which side of the rivalry I was on necessarily, that was probably the moment where I was like, all right, this is pretty cool. Georgia's this move by Mark Richt was a pretty cool one.
Kipp, you got anything you'd like to share?
I mean, yeah, we had celebrations in the end zone. We had Noshawn, the whole bench clearing out, and then we had Urban Meyer calling those timeouts at the end of the game. I mean, these are things that you don't think Kirby Smart saw that as well. I just think that this rivalry game is just one where Florida's dominance during the Spurrier years, I think Kirby wants to not just outdo that, but I mean, he just wants to completely obliterate this head-to-head record. And it's because of those years. And I think, seeing Georgia roll out Phaeton Bauta at quarterback is pretty high up there on the as someone who was covering it back then, just the curveball of curveballs that no one really saw coming. A guy that went out there and averaged like 4.5 yards a pass attempt through 4 picks. And he was supposed to be the, mobility he is supposed to bring the game, but he ran twice for 7 yards and got sacked as well. So I just think that, there were some very unfortunate games for Georgia in the past, but that's that seesaw that makes what you're experiencing now, I guess, seem that much better, and why I think Kirby Smart's just not going to let this rivalry go away or let up on this team anytime soon, because you've seen the opposite happen to the Dogs. Still, it hasn't been that long. I mean, hasn't been 10 years yet since that wonderful, Grayson Lambert, Bryce Ramsey, Phaeton Bauta trio of quarterbacks. They went out there against Florida. So, enjoy it now and know that, I don't think your head coach is going to let that happen again.
No doubt. For me, think about being a kid as a Georgia fan. I think it was 2004. They beat Florida, and I've still got the newspaper in my childhood bedroom that the AJC, the headline just said finally, because Florida had won, however many games in a row. Jarvis Jones in 2012 just wrecking shop. I remember like those like 29, 2010, 2011. I was in high school. Shout out Robert Walford, who I grew up with, huge Georgia fan. We used to go to a friend's Halloween party every year, and it would typically be, the Saturday around Halloween when the game was. And there would always be a point in the night where, the party's going on, people are playing games or whatever. And me and Robert are just in the corner watching the game. And we're just like, hey, we'll be over there in a minute. This game, one of them, I can't remember which year, went to overtime. And people are wanting to go outside. And we're like, no, we got to stay and watch this. And I think Florida wound up winning that game. But seeing that, I remember 2014, I think is the only time I went as a student. And it felt like Florida ran like the same 2 plays and ran for like 400 yards on Georgia and won that game. But it's very cool to cover that game live. Don't think I'll forget Brock Bowers' juggling touchdown catch from a few years ago. It's definitely a very cool game to cover live, and looking forward to doing it again on Saturday.
Great question, Hugh.
Yes, absolutely. Did a good job contributing to this episode. Well, we'll wrap it up right there. Again, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. Graham Hall from Swamp 24/7 will come on. We'll preview this Georgia-Florida matchup, what to know about Florida, what the Gators are saying going into this game. Again, go to dogs247.com, subscribe, get ready for this game. Get ready again for the start of men's basketball season. Go to YouTube, go to TikTok, subscribe, because we've got a lot of content there with football. And then again, men's basketball will be starting up next week. So we'll wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.